Hello dear 1000 PS friends, I'm Philipp, and today I have the great honor of welcoming you from our new studio. And we're about to talk about something really exclusive. I have before me the new Schuberth C5 carbon helmet. It is an absolute sensation from a technical point of view, but it also has a sensational price tag of almost 1500 euros. I was allowed to travel with Schuberth to Italy to Schuberth Performance, where this helmet was manufactured. And the production of this helmet is the secret of what makes this helmet so special. And that's what I'm going to tell you now. Schuberth charges 1,500 euros for the C5 carbon. At first glance, that's a pretty paltry figure. Above all, we have the bondage here, the mother of the helmet, so to speak. This is the normal C5. The normal C5 differs from the C5 carbon in that it mainly has a fiberglass shell and a piece of carbon incorporated, and that's up here. The helmet has a full carbon shell, 100% carbon. Everything on the outside is a single carbon shell, and that doesn't just make it more expensive in terms of the raw material, but above all in terms of the workmanship. And some of you may know that last year I was at Schuberth in Magdeburg and had them show me how the C5 is produced and how much manual labor is involved. This helmet here, the C5 carbon, is in a completely different league as far as manual labor is concerned, and that's the big difference. And when the invitation came and we spoke to Schuberth in advance about what they wanted to show us, and they said, as always, just like last year in Magdeburg, Philipp, we're going to show you something next year that the world hasn't seen yet. And I was a bit cautious because companies always say there are world firsts when it comes to innovations and things like that. And they exaggerate that because they like to talk a bit in marketing. When I found out that it was about the C5 carbon, I thought to myself, okay, that's fine. A helmet as we know it from the C5, a premium helmet, of course, and now with the carbon shell. Well, it might be nice, but what's so spectacular about it? I got to know the spectacle when I was down in Schio, the name of the place where Schuberth Performance is based. Schuberth Performance is the racing department, so to speak, in Italy, a wholly owned subsidiary of Schuberth. And I've now brought this back from Schio. It's a small replica of Max Verstappen's helmet. Max Verstappen's helmet, a carbon helmet, of course, a Formula One helmet, is produced in the same factory as this helmet. So the Schuberth C5, and now watch out, even passes through some of the same hands as Max Verstappen's helmet. This is made possible by the fact that this is a very small company, so you can imagine it as a larger factory in which this helmet is more or less completely produced. And they have the principle of one employee, one shell. This means that one employee is permanently responsible for ensuring that this helmet, as it stands here now, leaves the factory correctly. And that means even more manual labor, and we all know that more manual labor always means more costs because, of course, manual labor is more expensive than machine work. We know that. We also know that from watches, from luxury watches are so expensive because they have manufacturing processes, for example, which are simply put together by people in painstakingly detailed work compared to a common digital watch being strapped on and done. But what is so special about this helmet, apart from the amount of the manual labor involved and the fact that it is 200 grams lighter and costs almost twice as much? Well, it's the way this helmet is produced. And as I said, I was a bit skeptical at first because I thought to myself, well, they make a carbon helmet. Let me see how they make a carbon helmet. Unfortunately, that was a bit of a misguided approach on my part because I didn't expect what I was going to see. And I'm going to take you with me a little bit. This is a B-roll material that we cut in to show you what happens there until this helmet is created, or above all, the shell is created. Because the shell distinguishes the helmet from its normal bond. In reality, the rest is completely the same. Identical. It is really only the shell that distinguishes these two helmets. That's why all the advantages we know about the C5 are exactly the same. So we have the same inner lining, we have the same basic construction, also in terms of ergonomics. We have the same visor mechanism, the chin section is the same. We also have the same features with the preparation for the SC2 communication system from Schuberth. In other words, a completely identical helmet, except for the shell. And now I'm going to jump forward for a moment. So we were in Schio, where we had a look at it, and it starts with the fact that the owner, or not the owner, the managing director of Schuberth Performance, Alberto, is really passionate about this topic. Just imagine, he is an Italian, I would say in his mid-40s, who really lives for the subject. He was also one of the reasons why Max Verstappen wears a Schuberth Formula One helmet today, because Schuberth Performance started to develop carbon helmets. Some of you may remember that Philipp once had a serious accident. He got a spring on his helmet, so to speak, which almost smashed through and injured his eye. After this accident, they said, okay, we have to increase the safety regulations for helmets. And then a new homologation was put out to tender, so that the Formula One helmets here at the front are more or less bulletproof, so to speak, in order to cushion such debris and prevent it from getting through. Schuberth Performance then began to specialize in developing motorsport helmets with carbon to meet this new specification for Formula One. Max Verstappen then switched to Schuberth because there was a pre-season test in Barcelona where the new homologation was advertised, so to speak, or was mandatory. And Max Verstappen's helmet manufacturer didn't have a helmet that had already passed this new homologation at the time. And Schuberth Performance, Alberto, was on site at the racetrack. He was looking after the other riders they were supplying and had a prototype helmet for Max Verstappen to offer and said, try the helmet once, see if you like it. And if you like it, you're welcome to switch to us. In other words, that was the story of how Max Verstappen came to Schuberth. And then they said, yes, okay, now we'll show you how this helmet is made. I thought it was about the C5 carbon. But the secret is that this C5 carbon is made by the same people as Max Verstappen's. We had a look at it in Schio in the Schuberth Performance factory. And here's how it works. This helmet starts with a carbon mat. It's a carpet. It's about 1 meter or 2 meters, something like that. And this is, I've brought you this. This is what it looks like. These are carbon fabrics, so to speak, or carbon fibers. It's like a huge carpet. And the molds are cut out by lasers, which are then used to build this helmet. There are around 50 parts per C5 carbon helmet that make up the helmet shell, so to speak. These would be small pieces, like art puzzle parts. For a Formula One helmet from Max Verstappen and Quiot, that's around 90 to 100 parts. That means there is still a small difference in the complexity of the helmet construction. These carbon mats, like they have here, are cooled to minus 18 degrees. Because if you start to process them at normal room temperature, they would already harden. Because unlike, for example, in carbon mold making for motorcycle parts, they are not cooled. In carbon mold construction for motorcycle parts or similar, the resin in this mat is already bonded to the carbon fiber. This means that you peel off these protective stickers and then you have individual, very thin carbon mats, so to speak, which you then process. And this works as follows. It's a very, very complex process. The helmet is available in a positive form and a negative form. The negative mold, which is half of the helmet, so to speak. In other words, half of the helmet shell here is available as a negative mold, also made of carbon. And these puzzle pieces from the carbon mat are then worked into this mold. And this is done by hand. And that takes about an hour and a half for both halves. In other words, for each helmet. The entire carbon shell is laminated by hand in a cooled room by one employee, but you said you have around 10 or 12 employees who do this. Incidentally, as I said, this is also partly the same person who models the helmet for Sergio Perez or Max Verstappen. We were also allowed to try it out because when you see it like that, you think, yeah, okay, that's a bit tricky. But I tried it out myself, inserting these mats in this negative mold. And if you look at this material, it's really, really thin. And this structure here can be pulled apart very, very easily. And they have to incorporate some radii and bends. And you have to have a lot of experience to know how much you can stretch the material or not. Because, and this is also the special thing about this helmet, if you look at the surface, it really is flawless. That is also very important to them, and they are very proud of it. The transitions here are also flawless. There are other helmet manufacturers who use carbon shells in inverted commas. It's more of a kind of decoration where they like to darken the transitions or somehow design them in such a way that you can't see the transition from one carbon fiber mat to the next because you have to work very precisely. The special thing about this 100% handmade shell at Schuberth Performance is that they have managed to adapt these helmet halves perfectly to each other due to this very laborious process, so that you can't see any difference or any disturbance in the honeycomb structures. Schuberth Performance uses two types of carbon. One, which is called aesthetic carbon, is on the outside, which is more finely woven. And then on the inside, or one layer underneath, so to speak, there is the structural carbon, which is more coarsely woven, which is not so visually appealing, so to speak, but is more on the functional side and is perhaps also a little thicker. And you then work this into the areas where more protection is needed, so to speak, or where more strength is simply required. But that means that the first layer is worked into this negative mold, and if it doesn't fit, you can actually throw the helmet away again. And then after this first layer, the structural layer is also applied in carbon, so to speak, and this is also done by hand. Once one half is finished, the whole thing is then done in the same way in the other half. The carbon halves are joined together, screwed tightly together, and then covered with a vacuum bag before going into the autoclave. You may recognize an autoclave from a video by No Pain, where he was shown how it works at Ilmberger Carbon. An autoclave is practically an oven where pressure and temperature are generated. It looks like a tube, looks something like what I imagine a torpedo tube or something like that to look like. And inside there is a clearly defined temperature at a clearly defined pressure. And in there, these two helmet shells are then joined together so that at the end of the day, something like this comes out of this autoclave. It's a beer coaster, but it's exactly what's used here. And you can see it anyway, it's really hard. It doesn't give way, which is what happens when you bake the carbon properly. And this baking process is also the next secret. It's not just about how you process the carbon and which layers you combine with each other, where you make it stronger, the shell, where you make it weaker, but also when you bake it, at what temperature and with what pressure in what time window. Because Alberto, the boss of Schuberth Performance, explained to us that it's like baking a normal cake. There's a recipe. If I make the cake too hot, it becomes dry. If I make it at too low a temperature and for too short a time, it becomes soggy. And it's the same with carbon fiber. In other words, you have to time it precisely so that this carbon structure achieves maximum strength. And they didn't tell us the exact recipe, but I wrote it down. We have a baking time of around 3.5 hours per helmet, a temperature range of 120 to 130 degrees, and the whole thing at around 7 bar pressure. What they didn't tell us and what makes the difference, so to speak, with the helmet, or what makes the difference is the heating curve. So when does it get warm? When does it get cooler again? How do I let it cool down? And so on. Of course, that's a trade secret. They didn't tell us. At the end of the day, after around 3.5 hours of baking, the helmet comes out. These two vacuum sealed halves are unscrewed. And if everything goes well, that's the moment when you can see that the helmet shells have grown together perfectly, just like you can see here. So here you can also see where the helmet shells fit together, and that's the first point, so to speak. Does it fit or doesn't it fit? Then every square centimeter of the helmet is checked again, because if you could see somewhere that the carbon or the resin has leaked out or not gripped, or if air has got into it, you can throw the helmet away. This means that only a helmet that is 100% in order, from an aesthetic and technical point of view, leaves the factory in Italy. If the helmet is visually and technically in order, then it goes to the next station, where the helmet shell, which is now complete, so to speak, is fitted with holes using a water cutter. The ventilation holes are drilled or cut, milled more or less. The visor cutout is made. This is the only step that is done by machine. It's a pretty noisy process. It's a pretty important process because the work has to be very precise so that the helmet is assembled perfectly here in Magdeburg. Once the helmet shell is finished, the carbon shell, after about 1.5 hours of laminating work, after about 3.5 hours of baking time, and the cutting process takes a few minutes, then the helmet is theoretically ready for the clear coat. And that's also something where you can see the quality standards that Schuberth Performance has for this helmet, because the clear coat that's on it not only shimmers beautifully, but this helmet is painted in the same factory in Italy where Pagani or Bentley, for example, have it painted. It's also the same paint, more or less. This means that no savings are made here either, but rather the maximum quality is endeavored to be produced. After the helmet shell has been clear coated, it is checked again by an employee. This is known as a kind of light tunnel, more or less, where they simply look to see if there are any inclusions or anything like that. If anything is still visible, the helmet is either disposed of if it cannot be saved, or it is polished by hand. Attention again, manually, the individual points are ground out or polished so that the helmet is really flawless when it is finished. If the helmet shell is flawless, it is packed and sent to Magdeburg, where the video shows where I was last year. The helmet is then assembled in Magdeburg, which means that the plastic parts are put on for ventilation, the comm system is installed, the visor is put on, the adjustable, customizable pads are added, and then the helmet is finished, so to speak. I'm sure 1 or 2 people will say, wait a minute, now you've got a carbon helmet. Why is the keen part black? The keen part is black because it's made of the same plastic material as the normal C5, so to speak. So I said, well, now you're making such an expensive carbon helmet. Why are you saving money at the front? why isn't the chin part also made of carbon? I think the answer was very honest. They said that they could make the chin part out of carbon without any problems. They just want a perfect transition. And what they can't guarantee is that if you look at the weave structure of the carbon, you can never get it to match the chin part perfectly. In other words, you could see that it wouldn't match 100%, and they didn't want to do that to themselves. The demands were too high, so they said, no, we'll do it normally, not in carbon. It wouldn't have made a big difference in terms of weight, and we'll leave it as it is. Incidentally, the C5 carbon is only available in this color, visible carbon with shiny black elements, and the helmet is also only available in a limited edition. They haven't told us exactly how many pieces, but we're talking about around 4.5 to probably 8,000 pieces per year. This means that the helmet is expensive because it involves a lot of manual labor, because it uses the most expensive carbon technology currently available, because it is practically the same technology that is used in Formula One helmets. It's also roughly the same in terms of carbon quality. Formula One carbon is 1 or 2 steps higher, whereby the original helmet probably cost more than 10,000 euros from Max Verstappen, which costs comparatively little at 1,500 euros. Please see this very relatively. And that's what you get. So not only do you get a 200-gram lighter C5, but above all, you get a piece of craftsmanship. I would say that if someone has a carbon fetish like I do, then you can see that a bit more heart and soul has gone into it. It's just like an automatic watch. There's just a bit more engineering in it. There's a bit more heart and soul in it. There's perhaps a little bit more of the material used, a bit more finely crafted. You get that. But I have to say, I don't want to advertise this helmet too much because it's your decision whether you want to spend so much money on this helmet or not. Because at the end of the day, it's nothing more than a perfectly crafted carbon helmet. But a C5, which is just a bit lighter, has the same features. It also has the same ECE 2206 safety standard, which means it's just as safe. Although I was told in Schio during the internal tests, of course, the helmet performed better, even better, and has even better values in the crash test than the normal C5, because you can simply get more out of the carbon, the structure, and the technical possibilities of the carbon with less weight. And that's something else I'd like to say at the end for clarification, which is very important. This helmet is safe. That helmet is also safe. Every helmet that has the ECE 2206 standard is safe. It is not at all difficult to build a safe motorbike helmet today. The problem with motorbike helmet construction is rather a different one, namely this conflict of objectives between I want a light helmet, I want a quiet helmet, I want a cheap helmet, I want a safe helmet, and I want it to fit me well. That means we have to consider a lot of different things to find a helmet that suits us. They assured me that you can easily build a steel helmet that is bulletproof, explosion proof, and so on, and none of us want to put it on. And that's also the case with this helmet. So the development of this helmet took 3 years because it was so difficult, not only to find the right formula for the carbon processing so that it would fit, but also to make the helmet possible at all. Every helmet that has the ECE 2206 standard is safe. It is not at all difficult to build a safe motorbike helmet today. The problem with motorbike helmet construction is rather a different one, namely this conflict of objectives between I want a light helmet, I want a quiet helmet, I want a cheap helmet, I want a safe helmet, and I want it to fit me well. That means we have to consider a lot of different things to find a helmet that suits us. They assured me that you can easily build a steel helmet that is bulletproof, explosion proof, and so on, and none of us want to put it on. And that's also the case with this helmet. So the development of this helmet took 3 years because it was so difficult, not only to find the right formula for the carbon processing so that it would fit, but also to make the helmet possible at all. We learned a lot from Formula One, and were the first manufacturer to transfer this to a common road and motorbike helmet. I would say that's quite unique. Whether the helmet is worth 1,500 euros to you or not, you are welcome to write that in the comments. I would also be interested because I also asked myself, is there a market for it? I asked Schuberth Performance and they said, yes, the pre-orders were very good. I honestly believe that too, because when I buy a motorbike, let's say a great touring turbo or something like that, then in Austria and Germany, we're already in the 25,000 to 30,000 euro range. That's a lot of money for a bike. If I then say that I also want the best helmet on the market in terms of craftsmanship, then this target group will probably say, well, then I'll just go for the C5 carbon because then I'll have the icing on the cake. It's not without reason that the C5 Carbon advert also features a multi-strada Pikes Peak, which shows that this target group is probably also on a motorbike ride like this. So we're definitely talking about a premium product here, which is not intended for the general public. For the masses, the C5 comes at a proud price, but I think we have a justified price. This is the helmet for people who say, okay, I want the maximum, I really want pure craftsmanship, I want carbon, I want to be even lighter. They get the helmet here without any loss of comfort or anything like that. But I can really tell you, I rode the helmet myself. It's on loan from Schuberth. We'll have to send it back later. But at the presentation in Schio, I was allowed to ride the helmet, and I can really say that you notice that it's lighter the first time you put it on. 200 grams, you can feel that. Whether 200 grams are worth twice the price, as I said, that's for you to decide. I think that's all I can tell you about the C5 Carbon. I must honestly say that I took a lot from the trip, including a lot of exciting things. I hope I was able to convey that to you a little. Little side note, as I said, the helmet is going back. We already tried the C5 last year, the standard version. Every crew member has one and have had good experiences with it. Please write in the comments about your experiences with the C5 and whether the C5 Carbon would be an option for you. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. See you soon. See you again. Bye bye.